Okay, so I just read Where the Zal River Flows. This was a free RPG day scenario, 2025 edition. I picked this up I was at one of the locations and they had a very generous allowance on the things you could pick up. And I was like, oh, I can convert over 5e stuff to Dungeon Crawl Classics or theoretically to Shadow Dark or something like that if I want to. So what the heck? I'll pick up this adventure. I don't know anybody involved in this. Sean Merwin sounds familiar. I saw, and I think this is referencing Titan's Keep, the overall setting or something. I saw Ed Greenwood's name, who I've heard of, and Keith Baker. Um, you know, okay. I don't really know any of the other folks, but Sean Merwin's name sounded familiar, but I don't know why I know that name. So I read this yesterday, time of recording, and as I was reading through, I'm like, I just really didn't like it. Uh, I and I normally try to be positive on here. I have on my blog. I've started this several years ago. I decided I was only going to review stuff that I liked, or at least that sparked some real strong interest in me. But I wasn't just going to tear things apart. And I don't want to feature stuff that I am just going to tear apart. So what I'm saying is I read this and I didn't like it. And I didn't like it because, like, to me, it was as an adventure. It was like I'm reading through. I'm like, boy, it's really railroady. It's kind of dull. It just goes like, you're doing this thing. You're on a boat. Something happens, and the boat is destroyed, and you have to make the rest of your journey across land. And then this is what you find. Then the next day, this is what you find, and then the next day, this is what you find. Okay, and it gives a little bit about hints at what there might be more than one way to solve an issue or whatever, but ultimately you're just trying to get from you got halfway on your journey, you're trying to get the other half of the way on your journey, and the way to go is bang 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 through these different scenes. And I don't know that's necessarily different from a lot of modules and adventures. I don't know, but something as I was like reading through I just felt like lifeless somehow. And and I was thinking about other modules and what made them different, and I don't have a solid thing on there. I'm not sure. And when I finished, I just put it away, and I was thinking like, oh, I'll hand this off to somebody at some point. Somebody maybe will get more out of it than me, whatever. And I kept thinking about it, like, what's going on? Why would you put in so much effort to put this thing together and put this out? And then I realized something that had not really clicked with me, in spite of the fact that on more than one occasion, it tells you to go onto the Titans Keep website. Now, brings up another issue. I have a thing about the resiliency of games over time, and relying on downloads and websites, I think, is a mistake. But this free comic book day, free comic book day. I almost said the correct thing and corrected myself at the last second to say the wrong thing. Free RPG day. So, okay, whatever. I will forgive it for the going onto the website to get the characters. But what I realized as I thought about it and then went back and looked inside and looked at the little write-ups on the characters is that this is what makes the difference. And this is what I wasn't getting during the rest of this. The adventure is I don't say this in a harsh way, and it's not necessarily meant to be harsh, but it's a bland railroad. We'll say, as an adventure, as a framework, it's a bland railroad. It is start at point A, go to point, B, C, D, the end. Okay, that's not interesting. The encounters themselves, I guess, if you're into the world and its politics, maybe those could be interesting. I didn't find them especially captivating. Nothing about them. in the environment, same way. Like there was nothing about it that grabbed me, but I think it's because the play is in the characters. These are each characters with motivations and desires and secrets. And the bland scaffolding of this railroad allows all of that to then become what happens at the table. I'm not saying it's right or wrong to have a bland scaffolding. I would have loved something more interesting, more unique, generally. But this isn't meant to be plugged into another campaign either. This is meant as a one shot using these particular pre-gen characters. So they are built to have the drama contained within them. So you get handed that character at a con or at a shop or whatever. You read through that and you see, oh, I have this secret, I have this desire, and I have this, bad thing coming or something. So then you start to react, and that changes the way each of those perhaps boring encounters become less boring because of that. So, anyway, it got me thinking about adventure design and how there are different ways of doing it. I'm not saying one's good or bad. I think that yes, they're good and bad, and good adventures are good adventures, bad adventures are bad adventures. But there's different ways of doing it. There's no one way. There's no right way. There might be right ways within them, but there's no single right way to write a module or an adventure. It got me thinking back to classics like this is actually, I think, Village of Hamlet is in here, I believe, in the Moat House, and how some of the early D&D adventures were famous for sometimes their weird things like having every last coin accounted for but no character names, that kind of thing. So it leaves a lot of options, but it also leaves a lot of blank spots, which leaves a lot of work for the GM, but also a lot of ways to bring individuality to your table in the way that I think playing these characters, then each player taking on a role playing, then brings a uniqueness, their interpretation of this specific character. So maybe the event is boring. Okay, I'm on the shore and here are some river raiders. Okay. I go in and there's, I don't know, goblins or whatever. It's all the encounters that you typically find. But what makes it interesting is how this player playing this specific character and their interpretation of that character interplay with somebody else doing the same. That's where stuff gets interesting. I also think about this one. My memory of this, I read it a while back, but my memory of this is that the actual scenario is extremely short and pretty simple. But you are playing these characters who all have very specific motivations and reasons for being there and reasons for doing what they do. But it all got me thinking back to the single best, if I picked one, and I've had a lot of great sessions over the time and I've had a lot of great games over the years. But if I had to pick a single session that was the best I ever played, the greatest night of role playing I've experienced, it might be hyperbole again. I've had a lot of amazing encounters and amazing evenings and all this sort of thing. But it would have been playing the Unknown Armies scenario, which I believe was called Jailbreak. I no longer have that. I passed that game and the scenario on, but it was from the scenario book One Shots. When I think about it, I played the game. I had never played the game before. I had not read the scenario. I wasn't familiar, but I was handed this character, and everybody else around the table, they were each handed their own characters, and we played this session, and we brought it to life. And it was great. It was great role playing. It was great. Everything came together, and it was really fantastic. I went back and I read the scenario later, and I remember reading it thinking like, this is all right. But it's so simple. It's a bunch of people on a prison bus. I think there's a storm. They all take shelter from the storm in, there's like a prison break, and they all take shelter from the storm in this house. There's an old couple in the house and some weird crap going on. And that's it. That's the whole scenario. I mean, your characters go into the house. This is what's going on in the house. That's it. That's the whole thing. All of the magic came from the table. The imagery and the way that things played out. You know, it wasn't. My character was a serial killer who was working as a mob hitman. So it basically kind of covered up his predilections. And I was able to play, and he had this, like, as fictionalized versions of serial killers often do, and hitmen, he had a particular skewed sense of honor, if you want to be real generous. And so, like, the way I played that character versus the way another person was playing somebody who was an abusive drunk who had been in prison for doing some bad stuff while drunk and being abusive. And the way our two characters didn't work well together, that came from the role play at the table. And it wasn't in the scenario. And that's what I'm getting at. So sometimes, sometimes maybe the magic isn't in the scenario or the way that the encounters are written or the map or the whatever. And it was what I was thinking about. It made me reassess this. I still think that the framework of this scenario is, to me, so personal, to me, uninteresting. I read through it and I'm like, I would not lift this for one of my games. I just read Castle White Rock, which I was not even interested in. For the first time since I started going to Free RPG Day, I didn't care about the Goodman Games release, but I ended up grabbing it for the same reason I got this. I was at a shop that allowed a lot of stuff, and I was like, oh, heck with it, I'll just pick it up. And I read it, and I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed reading it, but also I enjoyed, like, thinking about how I would plug that into my scenario. That is not the case with this. But thinking about it, reassessing it, thinking about the way that the pre-made characters would interact, it made me just think that this isn't, I don't think this is bad. I sat back at the end of, after thinking about it, and thought, I understand why the effort was put in. It was neat. And it just made me think about scenario construction and the different ways of doing it and what's important to different styles of scenarios. And I actually think that, especially for one shots, scenarios that are made to be one shots, that's it. And I think maybe a lot of Call of Cthulhu scenarios could use a little bit more of this. And maybe they're doing it more than I've noticed, but having each character really have their reasons for doing stuff. Free League, the Alien RPG, I think is doing a really good job with that, and I'd like to see it more for certain types of games, and I think especially for games scenarios that are meant only to be one shots, not campaign launches, not easily plugged into another game. And that's the thing with Castle White Rock. As I read through this, I immediately, like, I know geographically where I'm going to plug this into my little fantasy map that I'm building for DCC or Shadow Dark, whatever I end up running. I know exactly how it's going to get put into that. I know a couple of the factions that I'm going to connect it to in my own version of these things. No problem. But this is like a one shot. This isn't meant to be part of a larger thing. So those were just some of my thoughts. If you've got any thoughts on what I just said, great. Please share them below. Be gentle. I'm speaking extemporaneously, and extraneously, I guess, depending on who you talk to, but extemporaneous. Who knows? Maybe I'm just full of crap. Until next time, take care.